The stray dog was shivering, its heartbeat thumping rapidly against Emily's palms. Under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of the clinic, the animal looked smaller, more fragile. Emily pressed a towel against its flank, searching for the wound, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She reached for the antiseptic on the shelf, but her hand stopped mid-air. The shelf was bare. She checked the ledger, flipping through pages of empty inventory, realizing she could not pay for the supplies this week. The weight of the situation settled in her chest like lead. Outside, the city traffic blurred past the window, but inside, the silence was absolute. She thought of the pile of envelopes waiting on her kitchen table back home. Each one was a reminder of the student loans that loomed over her life, a debt that grew larger every month. She looked down at the dog. It whimpered, tucking its head into her arm. Emily had dedicated her life to healing, yet here she was, paralyzed by the arithmetic of survival. She could not afford the medicine, and she could not bear to walk away. The clinic felt less like a sanctuary and more like a closing trap. Emily pulled the front door shut, the silence of the apartment heavy and suffocating. She walked to the desk, her fingers trembling as she gathered the stack of unpaid bills. Each envelope felt like a brick, heavy with the demand for payment she could not meet. She dropped them onto the wood, the sound sharper than expected in the quiet room. She slumped into the chair, staring at the numbers. They were not just figures. They were obstacles blocking her from the work she loved. She reached out to clear the space, her hand brushing against a forgotten book left on the corner of the desk. It was a worn copy of Napoleon Hill. She opened it, not seeking answers, just needing a distraction from the crushing reality of her bank balance. A single sentence anchored her gaze. Success comes when purpose is combined with organized planning. She read the words twice. The abstract concept hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had been treating her passion like a burden and her money like an enemy. She looked at the bills again, but the panic in her chest receded, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. She reached into the drawer, pulled out a fresh ledger, and set it open. The victim was gone. The architect had arrived. Emily gripped the pen, the tip hovering over the blank page. She began to strip away the facade of her monthly spending. Every subscription, every convenience, every stray purchase was interrogated. She did not just record numbers, she labeled them. Needs were separated from inefficiencies. High-interest debt was identified as the primary infection, the source of her financial fever. She assigned it a deadline, a target to be neutralized with cold, calculated precision. She treated the ledger like a patient chart. Every dollar earned was a resource to be deployed, not a temporary comfort to be spent. She allocated a portion to the immediate debt, another to a reserve fund, and a third to basic survival. There was no room for guesswork. When she finished, the page was a map of intent. Her bank balance was no longer a mystery to be feared, but a tool to be managed. She reviewed the rows of figures, her eyes tracing the paths of her capital. The anxiety that had clouded her mind for years began to sharpen into clarity. She had stopped drifting. She was now the surgeon of her own stability, cutting away the rot to ensure the survival of her true purpose. The ledger was closed, the plan was set, and for the first time, she slept without the weight of the unknown pressing against her ribs. The seasons cycled outside her window, but inside, the rhythm of her life remained consistent. Emily turned her focus toward the horizon, treating time as her most valuable asset. While her peers traded their paychecks for immediate upgrades, Emily funneled hers into accounts that grew while she slept. She watched her colleagues navigate the pressures of status, seeing them buy things that depreciated the moment they left the store. She chose a different path. Every surplus dollar was diverted into index funds. She tightened her budget until it felt natural, viewing restraint not as a deprivation, but as a strategic maneuver. There were moments when the pressure to join the crowd tugged at her, especially during holiday gatherings or office celebrations. She felt the weight of social expectation, the unspoken demand to display success through possessions. Instead, she looked at her ledger. She looked at the compounding interest charts. She saw potential energy waiting to be released. She bought assets that generated value rather than items that consumed it. Her life became a series of quiet, disciplined choices that no one else could see. She was playing a game of decades, not days. The foundation grew thicker, layer by layer, buried beneath the surface of her daily routine. By the time others noticed her stability, she had already secured a future that was no longer tied to a single paycheck. The focus shifted from preservation to expansion. Emily began scouting the city for undervalued corners, looking past the peeling paint and the broken windows to see the utility beneath. She spent her weekends inside empty buildings, calculating structural integrity and potential foot traffic. When a prime location hit the market, the price was steep, requiring a down payment that drained her reserves to the floorboards. She hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, she authorized the transfer. The transition was absolute. She was no longer just a worker saving for safety. She was a participant in the physical growth of her own infrastructure. She funneled every spare cent into renovations, managing the tradesmen and the timelines between her shifts at the clinic. Her life turned into a relentless marathon. She was the one who arrived first to unlock the doors, and the last to leave, her hands stained with dust and ink from contracts. There were no shortcuts. She skipped vacations and ignored the invitations to relax, treating every dollar as a brick in a structure that was slowly rising. The discipline that had once been a quiet practice in her apartment now became a public, high-stakes pursuit of ownership. She was building an empire, 1 square foot at a time, leaving behind the safety of a steady paycheck for the volatile potential of her own venture. The opportunity arrived in the form of a sale notice on the clinic door. It was the place where she had spent years working, and now it was for sale. Emily looked at her accumulated assets and saw that one final move remained. She had to gamble everything. She calculated the figures until the numbers blurred on the page. To acquire the clinic, she would have to empty every account she had spent years building. She would return to zero. She stared at the contract for an hour, the pen heavy in her hand. She signed. The transition turned her life into a blur of exhaustion. She was no longer just the practitioner. She was the owner, the landlord, and the primary creditor. Nights were spent pacing the clinic floor, reviewing ledgers by the dim glow of a desk lamp, her pulse spiking at the sound of a rattling pipe or a flickering light. The fear was a physical weight in her chest. If the business failed, she lost the years of sacrifice, the savings, and the future she had carefully mapped. She worked 18-hour shifts, ignoring the fatigue that settled into her bones, driven by the singular thought that she had no margin for error left. She was all in, and the walls of the clinic felt like they were closing in with every passing day. The turning point was subtle. A month of black ink on the ledger, then 2, then a quarter of consistent profit. The suffocating pressure that had lived in her chest for years began to dissipate, replaced by the rhythm of a business that finally functioned without her constant intervention. Emily did not slow down. She took the surplus and looked at the city map again. She leased a second space in a neighborhood that lacked access to care. Then, she hired a team to manage the first location while she oversaw the build-out of the third. The expansion was not a slow climb, it was a cascade. She learned to delegate, to read profit and loss statements in minutes, and to move capital where it generated the most impact. Her days were no longer defined by the terror of a single missed payment. They were defined by growth charts and the steady hum of 3 thriving clinics. The sleepless nights vanished, replaced by the calculated focus of a manager who understood her own reach. Where she once scrambled to keep the doors open, she now navigated the logistics of a growing network. The business grew on its own momentum, compounding with every new patient, every successful treatment, and every reinvested dollar. She had moved from the edge of collapse to the center of a self-sustaining system. The final audit began on a Tuesday evening. The clinics were quiet, the staff had departed, and the hum of the city retreated into the distance. Emily pulled the digital files onto her screen, aggregating the accounts from each location. She scanned the columns of numbers, the interest accruals, and the property valuations. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the final sheet. She refreshed the total. The figure sat there, stark and absolute, $1 million. She leaned back, the leather of her chair creaking in the silence. She did not reach for the phone. She did not notify the board. She sat still, watching the streetlights illuminate the office walls. For years, the pursuit of this number had dictated her every movement, a target she had chased through debt and exhaustion. Now that it was reached, the weight of it changed. It no longer felt like a safety net or a measure of status. Looking at the screen, the number lost its abstract quality and transformed into something tangible. It was a lever. It was a resource. She tapped the desk, the sound echoing in the empty room. She understood now that the wealth was not the destination. It was the instrument she had been building all along. She closed the ledger, the power suddenly clear. The hesitation lasted only until the next morning. Emily opened her checkbook, the paper crisp under her pen. She wrote the first amount, a figure that would have terrified her 10 years ago, and addressed it to the local rescue shelter that had barely survived on scraps since she started. She did not stop there. She drafted the legal framework for a scholarship fund, specifically targeting students burdened by the same crushing debt that once held her life in a vice. She worked through the morning, matching names to accounts, verifying details, and signing authorizations that would ripple through the community. The money moved out of the static accounts and into the hands of those who needed it most. She remembered the stray dog she had carried into the clinic, its ribs visible, its future uncertain. That was the moment she had been trying to fix ever since. Now, she was not just curing one animal at a time, she was funding an entire infrastructure of care. She watched the confirmation screens turn green. Payment sent, fund established, grant approved. She stood up and walked to the door, the weight of the bank balance gone, replaced by the kinetic energy of a mission finally in full motion. The impact was no longer a theory, it was happening. A young intern stood in the doorway, staring at the stack of funding approvals on Emily's desk. The student looked between the financial spreadsheets and the intake forms for the new shelter ward. "How do you balance the profit with the compassion?" the intern asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emily stood up, walked to the large window, and pointed to the glass sign hanging above the clinic entrance. She looked back, her expression steady and grounded. "Prosperity is not the enemy of purpose," she said. "It is the fuel." The intern followed her gaze to the busy lobby, where the staff worked with the tools and resources her planning had provided. Emily explained that the strategy she once used to survive the debt was the same mechanism now allowing her to scale her care. She had turned her life into a bridge between the scarcity she had once known and the abundance she now commanded. She didn't just save lives. She built the systems that ensured more lives could be saved long after she left the room. The intern nodded, finally seeing the architecture behind the kindness. Emily turned back to her desk and picked up her pen. The work was not finished, but the path was set. She had proven that when service is paired with strategy, the impact truly becomes limitless.